All right. Okay, so finally, we are here to talk about user connection cleanup with Snapshot. So for those of you that have ever been through this before, where you have lots and lots of inactive users in an org, or lots of maybe active users that need to be remapped to other users in terms of all their connections and all their touch points in the org, this can be a really, really daunting task. And that's what we're really going to talk about, how Snapshot, we have a brand new feature that we've released called User Connection Cleanup. It's really made to address this issue, and hopefully you guys will get a good look at that today. So just a minute for those of you, I know some of you are our current customers coming to see the new stuff, but a few of you are not customers. So just a real quick overview of what Snapshot is. Snapshot is a holistic org management tool for Salesforce. And what we mean by that is we're not simply a release management tool. We do a lot of things on the front end before release, like the user connection cleanup, that really helps you address the entire life cycle of your orgs. So to kind of break that into some categories, we do clicks not code release management. By clicks not code, we mean that, like change sets, if you're an administrator who doesn't want to work with repos or diff XML, you can use our tool from a clicks not code approach, but have a lot more power and functionality than something like change sets gives you. Now we can diff XML and we can work with repos. So if you are a developer, we certainly can fit your need as well, but it's not required for our tool. Also, we do relational data migration. So that means moving data, but keeping all the relationships between it when you move the data through orgs. And we also, do lots of tricks with that, like scramble sensitive fields, map fields to different fields, or objects to different objects. So just a full featured data migration tool. Is everybody okay with the audio there? Jill, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I see this little thing, reconnecting to audio. I'm like, oh God. Sorry guys, little technical issues with the webinar today. Hopefully we'll get through it. We also do org documentation. So we have very comprehensive documentation, data dictionary, and other types of documentation that can document both the structure and the complexity of your org, either for administrator reference or compliance. We have a bunch of org optimization and cleanup tools. One of them we're going to see today, which is the user connection cleanup. But other stuff too, we have an algorithm that analyzes every piece of metadata in the org, and it tells you what's not being used so that you can clean it up with our tools. This covers everything. It's a lot more powerful than something like App Optimizer. It doesn't have any limits on the numbers. It hits every metadata type. So whether it's fields, reports, groups, views, roles, email templates, whatever, queues, we can clean it up. So also, we have a full suite of tools that manage profiles and permission sets. If some of you were lucky enough, I'm going to say lucky, to be on our webinar a few weeks back, you saw me really cover these tools in detail. So each of these webinar series, we're kind of covering different sections of the tool to get you more informed about it. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the problems with user connections and cleaning them up. So the biggest issue really is that inactive users can be connected to really a lot of important areas inside of your Salesforce org. So this could be user connections, data connections, metadata links, emails like workflows, team members, lots of touch points for a user. And if you have inactive users that are connected to those things, those bad connections can break your critical business process and your workflow requirements. So you can literally have a breakdown of some of those, automated systems and workflows and other things in your org. And the biggest problem with it is that cleaning it up, especially if you have a large org with a lot of users and a lot of complexity, cleaning it up can be really complex just to understand all the connections, and then a very tedious manual slog to get through it all and to get everything in tip-top shape. So we've developed a tool that really directly addresses that, and that is what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to jump over to our Snapshot tool here. So just a few minutes on a little bit of an overview here. We kind of talked about what Snapshot does, but we're really going to mostly focus on the user connection stuff today. But for those that haven't seen it before, Snapshot is a desktop client. That's a visual drag and drop tool that lets you connect with all your Salesforce orgs and repos if you're using them, and do all those things that we saw on the slide: release management, data migration, cleaning up your org, managing your security model, and so forth. So this is a pretty complex layout for a customer here. These blue icons are connections to Salesforce orgs. They could be any kind of org, like a production org, sandbox, developer, DX. These green icons are connections to code repositories. So if you are working with GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that, we can connect to those and push and pull metadata. And then connecting everything up are what we call deploy arrows. And those really enable a pipeline to move things around between either repos or from orgs to orgs. So to keep things simple today, we're going to jump over to a little bit easier of a view to digest. So we're going to jump over to another workspace here where I just have 3 Salesforce orgs: a sandbox org, a staging org, and a production org that I've connected together here. So pretty straightforward. The fundamental step with Snapshot, really to doing almost anything with it, whether it's release management or whether it's org cleanup or whether it's handling your users or whether it's working with your security model, is to back up the metadata. That you have to take a snapshot of it or a picture of it so that it can be analyzed and used in various ways. That's really simple to do with our tool. You just grab a blue icon, you drag it onto the screen, and it's going to ask me, hey, what org do you want to connect to? And as we said before, this could be any kind of org. I could connect to a production, sandbox, developer, whatever. And then it's going to log me in, and it's going to take a backup. When I click the Take Snapshot button, it's going to take a backup of that org. And that fundamental piece of data, or backup metadata, we should say, is really going to be enable us to do lots of things, including the user cleanup that we saw today. And these could be scheduled. So maybe I want to back up the org daily, weekly, monthly for disaster recovery. So that's obviously important as well. So let's jump out of there. Once we've backed up an org, the tool really works on 2 right clicks. All right. Well, the first right click is on one of these deploy arrows. So you can connect anything to anything. Again, it's all visual with drag and drop. And once you've done that, you can right click on a deploy arrow, and that lets you deploy metadata, do rollbacks. If you want to get into CI, you can do that. It lets you compare the 2 orgs in lots of different ways to really understand how they're different. It lets you also deploy data. So those are all sort of your cross-org actions. But where we're really going to spend our time today is on the in-org actions, and those are with a right click on an org. So from here, I could take more backups or look at changes over time in my org. But we've also separated into these 4 categories a lot of the things that administrators are doing inside of the org. So one thing is you might want to visualize the org, look at the metadata or see how what the security is on profiles or permission sets. We have lots of tools for documenting the org. This is like a data dictionary, that documents the structure of your org. But as you can see here from this list, a lot of different ways to sort of document the structure. We can do optimization. This is where we're going to spend some of our time today. Everything's really covered here, from field usage to the forgotten assets is that metadata analysis tool I told you about earlier, all the way down to the user connection cleanup, which we're going to look at here shortly. And then we also have a number of security reports that help you look at security by user, track what your users are doing in your org, lots of different tools there to help manage it. So again, it's really a full holistic lifecycle management tool for administrators to really tackle a lot of the problems that they have. And on that note, we're going to talk today under this optimize here about tackling user cleanup. So this really takes us through a number of tabs that really take us through the process of handling all of those user connections and remapping them. So the first thing that we want to do is select the users that we're going to work with. There's a nice little button here for that. And you could search for them by name, by role, by profile, lots of different ways to kind of search for them. One that's really useful, especially when you're talking about inactive users, is search by last login date, right? So here I could click and, look at users that logged in 3 months ago or maybe 1 year ago. And I could search for both active and inactive users, and I can search for the user type as well, like standard, partner, whatever. So lots of ways to sort of slice and dice it. So I'm going to keep it simple here. We're going to search for everybody by name. We're going to search for both active and inactive, all user types. And you can see I come up with a pretty short list. That's because I'm in a little dev org. Now, your org might have thousands in that list if you did that. Just depends on your org size. So I've already got some users selected over here that I'm working with, but I'm going to go ahead and add in another user here as well. And then we're going to click OK, and that's going to take us back to the main screen here. So your first step is really selecting what users you want to do this connection remapping with, okay? So I could come in here and select those users, and then over here on the right are all of the different connections as far as metadata is concerned that your users could be connected to. It's very comprehensive. There's, I think, over 40 types here. So lots of it, pretty much all of it is covered. So this would be things like user permissions, you know, that they like permission sets they're connected to. This could be things like data connections, queue members, user managers, all those kind of things. Metadata links, so approval processes, assignment rules, right? Email addresses. This one's pretty cool. So we also can remap email addresses. There's a lot of things you may recognize here, but here's a big one at the end, right? Workflows. So a lot of people have the issue of a certain email address being what's driving or having a workflow, and this can remap that as well. And actually, some of our customers use this sort of as a security tool. Imagine if you had an active user, it doesn't have to be an inactive user, who went in and had rights to insert their email into some workflows that weren't supposed to be there. This tool would allow you to capture that and remap it as well. And then lastly, team members. So a bunch of stuff related to team members, predefined case team members, closed opportunity team members. So these are all those spider web of user metadata connections that exist in the Salesforce org. We're just going to cast a wide net here on our little demo. You can see with a right click, I could turn on or off, different categories, but I'm just going to select them all, okay? So once you define the users that you want to, remap the connections from and all of the connections, we then let you go in and actually do the work. And that's our next tab over, which is our user cleanup. So a couple things here. This is actually doing the work. So this is, this is the, aha moment of the tool is that, remapping all these things for a user manually in Salesforce is intense and brutal. Even more so, we could do it multiple users at once, right? So the first thing that you want to do, you see up here, we got this drop down. The first thing is you've got a test run only. This is where it's going to be default when you come here, but it's also where you're always going to want to start. This is like a validation if you were doing a deployment, right? It's going to go and say, this is what's going to happen if you do this. This is everything that gets remapped. Then we have, of course, doing it, but stopping it if there's an error, or doing it and continuing if there's an error. But you're always going to start here, which is sort of like your validation. The first thing that you want to do is select the replacement user. So again, we're remapping these things, maybe from an inactive to an active user. You could also use this tool, by the way, to remap active users. Maybe you've got a user that's changing roles and you need to remap a lot of these workflows or other things. This is a great place to do that and save yourself a ton of time as well. So it doesn't really care whether you're remapping inactive or active. Obviously, inactive is a big target for a lot of people, but it certainly could be active users as well. So here I click Select Replacement User. This lets me search for the user by name or what have you, and then select the user that I want, and then that user is going to be the targeted user to swap out for the other users, okay? So maybe I don't want to remap everybody to this user, all of their stuff. Maybe I just want to take this one inactive user here. By the way, if you click on a user over here on the far right, you can find out if they're active, frozen, locked, what their username is, the basic stuff you need to make sure you've got the right target. And then in this case, we can now move forward and do the user cleanup. So I'm doing a test run only. Now, I think this user has already been cleaned up, this inactive user, but let's find out. I'm going to click user cleanup here. And it's going to go through and tell me what would happen if we did that operation for all of these different types. And basically, yeah, this user's already been cleaned up. That's why you don't see a list of things that were swapped, okay? But let's pick a different user here. Let's go in and select this user, Bill Barnes, and let's do a user cleanup test to swap to Bill Appleton up here and see what we get. Now we're starting to see a lot of action. A lot of action. It's going through all of these selected metadata types, looking for where there are connections, and then it's going to remap those. Now, of course, we're validating, so it didn't actually do it, but it shows me what would have happened. So we have a pretty comprehensive list here of all the stuff that would be remapped, like permission set, assignment, or user package license record, queue member, whatever. It goes through the list and all those different things that we've selected, and it finds all those remappings. Now, what's cool is you can right-click here and take this out if you need a copy of it, so that you could have before you go do it, you could say, hey, this is everything that's going to be remapped. Or we could now move down a step and go ahead and do the remapping. I'm not going to do it in my org because I keep this one here for a demo. But you get the idea. Now you would actually go and execute it and do all those remappings. And we know that it's going to work because we've already done a validation here and everything looks great. Okay, so one other thing I did want to show is if you right-click on users over here, we have some quick actions. You could check all, check none, check active, check inactive, So that's pretty interesting because, if you are doing this for hundreds of users, maybe you're cleaning up a really old org with tons of inactive users or something like that, those things can make it quick. But a couple things that I like here as well. So if I go in and I say edit selected user, if I go in here and I say edit multiple users, what this does is it lets me select any users and change their status. So I could take this user, make them active, generate a password and notify them, that kind of stuff. So just again, when we're talking about managing users, a couple little quick tips there that make your life a little bit easier. Oops, I don't want to do that. Let's cancel out. So anyway, this is where you're remapping to all of the metadata items that the user could be connected to. The next tab over is actually cleaning up ownership of data. So this screen looks pretty similar to the other screen. It brought over the user that we're remapping to, but of course I could click here and change that to a different user if I needed to. But essentially what we're doing here is we have a list of data, all the different objects, custom or otherwise, that exist in the org that user might have ownership of. And we could select any or all of those and remap that ownership to a different user. So maybe, we want to remap accounts or opportunities. It depends on what your use case is. A good example might be case. So I'm going to use my quick find up here for case. So this is kind of an interesting use case, right? So maybe all of the closed cases I want to leave mapped to this current user because, they actually solved those cases before they left the company or whatever. So maybe I just want to remap open cases to Bill Appleton so that he can take over now that this person's inactive and they're leaving the organization. So this could be done for any data type, right? Could be accounts, opportunities, cases, doesn't matter, your custom objects, whatever. But this will actually perform that remapping. So it really works just like the metadata side did. You want to start with your validation, and it will do any remapping that needs to be done of the ownership of the data. So that's essentially the meat of the user cleanup tool. You can take all of the metadata connections and remap them. You can take all of the data ownership and remap it, and you could do it in a really rapid way. You could do it for multiple users simultaneously. And, depending on your situation, this could save you hundreds of hours of time. And really, sometimes just figuring this stuff out inside of Salesforce in a really complex org is so hard to do that you really need a tool just to understand it before you could even remap it. So that's really what this new feature is targeted at. So the next tabs are really just sort of useful add-ons. We've got a reporting, and essentially you could preview or display the report. What it's going to do is based on the selections that you have and the users that you've selected, it's going to generate a report of what would be remapped. So this is just a nicely formatted way that you can right-click, export it out as a CSV, a PDF, or an Excel file, maybe to provide to a manager and say, hey, I'm going to remap this user. Here's everything that's going to get mapped, remapped, that kind of stuff. So just pulling that information out as a report. So you might want to come here, come to the user cleanup tab, set it up, jump over here and build a report of it, and then come back later and actually do the remapping after you've sort of pulled a report to show everybody this is what's going to happen. So again, just a nice way to manage those users, both active or inactive if you need to. All right, so let's jump out a little bit and talk a little bit more about user management. Because I'm a genius, I closed my application there. That's okay. We're going to open it back up real quick. So one other part of our user management that's been in the tool for a long time, but a lot of people really aren't familiar with or maybe don't know that we have, is that we also have user activity timeline monitoring. And it's different, different than user cleanup, but related, right? So if I right click on any org and I go down to security, we have under our security thing, the user activity timeline. And what this will do is it will let me select any set of users and look through all of the different logs and ways that they're tracked inside of Salesforce, pull it into one cohesive place where you can see everything that they're doing. So just like before, I could select any users that I want. I could have a bunch in the report or just one at a time. We'll stick with one here to keep it simple. And then once you've selected that user, you can go through the event log file. So all those things that are tracked in the event log, right? Bulk API usage, all that stuff. Login history, any successful or failed logins, right? Setup audit trail. So everybody's probably familiar with the setup audit trail. That can all be pulled in here. Standard objects, custom objects, object history. And again, like before, maybe you want to check it all. It just depends on your scenario. And then what you can do is you can go in and it will start crunching through that information and getting you a log of all of it for you to see. Now, obviously, that's a lot of stuff I just selected. So we're not going to sit here and run through all of it. I'm going to stop it here in just a little bit with the escape key, and we'll stop it where it currently is. But while it's doing that, let me just give you a little bit of an example of how customers use this. We had a customer who had a sales rep who was leaving the company for a competitor. And they were a little concerned because that person's now going to go sell against them, and they had a pipeline. So when that person was leaving the company, they went into our user activity timeline and ran a full audit to see everything that that user had done, including what reports they had run. And what they found out was that on the day before they left, they downloaded and ran reports for their pipeline, their opportunity pipeline. So, as I say as a sales guy, never trust the sales guy, right? But they obviously had to have a really interesting conversation with them. So it's obviously a security type tool, but it's also a tool where you could track down login issues or any other type of activity that's going on in the org in a real sort of comprehensive way. So let me hit escape here. We're not going to let it go through all of that, but essentially it pulls it all into a report, that you can go through, broken down by the different things, and you could obviously with a right click export it. You can also set these things up on a schedule. All of our reports can be scheduled. You can also set up risk on this report. So what's high risk, medium risk, low risk? You can actually come in, go through all of those things and define what's low risk, medium risk, or high risk for you. Maybe it's high risk for you if somebody's downloading these particular reports or something like that. And of course, it'll be color coded in the report to make sort of analysis of potential issues easier. So it really lets you set it up and structure it in a way that you can quickly sort of digest the information and understand, what's going on with your users. And then you can hide all the different risk types and turn on or off your color coding and those kind of things. So anyway, just a nice complementary piece to the user connection cleanup that also lets you look at your users from that perspective as well. So I hope this was useful to our existing customers, but also maybe to people who are trying to tackle these issues. Obviously Snapshot's a very comprehensive tool. We've just barely scratched the surface on one feature. And one of the things that we do have that I think is useful are these webinar series that really cover all the different things that we do. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slide here that shows all of our connection information. And that shows, all how to get in touch with us. If you follow us on Twitter, you can get a look at all these different webinars. We post all the links there. And Jill, could you please post the link into the chat for everyone of the page? We have a page on our website that has the webinar series. We'll post that in the chat. You can click on it, bookmark it. We have a whole bunch of upcoming webinars that are going to cover other subjects with the tool as well for those that are interested. So with that, we're going to jump over to Q&A, and we're going to start answering some questions in the Q&A here. So I'll try to take those one by one. So one thing is we have a question on, can I clean up active as well as inactive users? Yeah, I probably should have maybe been more clear about that, but yes, we can remap active users the same way that you remap inactive users. And like I said, there's maybe a scenario where that makes sense. Maybe you've got a user that's moving to a different role and you need to remap a bunch of the stuff, and rather than bunches and bunches of clicks in Salesforce to do it all and track it all down, you could do that really easily with our tool. So yeah, it's really a full user connection management tool. It doesn't have to just be inactive. Inactive is just a real obvious target when you're talking about cleaning up and optimizing and fixing problems. So we have a question, does it also back up all the Salesforce object data as well? It's a good question. It can, but what we're not is a data warehousing solution. So if you're looking for a big giant cloud that replicates your Salesforce database, and then you could select, over time, and you could go back in time and selectively restore data, we don't do that. I mean, there's Own Backup, Sesame, there's a lot of tools out there that do that kind of stuff. What we are is a really good agile data moving tool. Those solutions are great for backup and restore, but the things you use Data Loader for, we do a lot better, which is agile data moving. Like I refresh a sandbox, I want to repopulate it with a data set. Or I want to grab a bunch of data from our production org, scramble some sensitive fields, and then put that in a sandbox for my development team to build stuff on. That kind of stuff we can do very rapidly and quickly with the tool. So while we're not a data warehousing solution, we do address a need that those solutions don't, which is really agile data moving. So we do, of course, back up data as part of that process, but we don't warehouse that data. So let me see. By the way, guys, if you have any questions while we're doing this about anything you saw today or other questions about the tool, please put those in the Q&A and we'll get to those as soon as we can. Okay, so another question about the user connection cleanup tool here. Can it handle emails? Yes, I think we covered it, but there is an email remapping section for all of those users that we saw there. And so all of those emails that a user may have that are in workflows or Apex or wherever it is can be tracked. We look at it all through the metadata and then let you swap it out for any other user's email address. The question is, how far back does this history go? Can you see the history for a specific record or object instead of user? So that's, I think, about the user activity timeline. So it goes back as far as those things like the event log, the setup audit trail, as far as Salesforce maintains that data. We're mining that data and pulling it in a cohesive way into the timeline. So we go back as far as they go back, where whenever your org cutoff is for example, for your setup audit trail, we can go back that far, but obviously not further because there's nothing there to mine at that point. You can see activity history for a specific object. You definitely can do that with the tool. However, we still do it by user. Now, maybe you would select all users in one specific object, and then you would have a history listed for that particular object for all of your users for whatever the time period is. So, yeah, so we do that, maybe not exactly the way you were thinking, where maybe you select an object and it just shows all the history for it, regardless of user. It is still user-based, but of course you could select all users and get a pretty comprehensive look at something like that. Okay, any other questions here? All right, that looks like we've answered them all. I want to thank everybody for your time today. If you're interested in seeing more about Snapshot, there's plenty of information on the screen there. Please just reach out to us. We're also on the App Exchange. If you search for Snapshot on the App Exchange, we do 14-day trials. We have nonprofit pricing. And our Twitter is @Metazoa. And we do lots of things like invitations for this kind of stuff, other interesting articles around Salesforce administration. You'll find lots of goodies on there. So please follow us on Twitter if you are the tweeting type. So thanks everybody for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week.